Next Generation Career and Technical Administrators Group. And we're excited to have all of you here. We think that this is going to be a good one, and I'm going to hit record right now. Robin, are you already recording? Oh, excuse. So we don't need to hit record. Robin's recording right now, and we're going to get on with the session. It's June 18th, 1:30 p.m., 2020. If you feel like you're going to the Midvale School for the Gifted, you are in the right place, because we think that you're all gifted and talented, and you're going to learn to pull instead of push in no time during these during this group and these professional learning. Today's topic is over instructional coaching, and just as a just to kind of start the session with my own 2 cents, I know no one really cares, but I believe that the reason that we have high turnover rate in career and technical education is because we have all of these teachers come in with outstanding technical knowledge, but they have they're limited on their ability to deliver instruction in multiple ways and to engage the students. So at some point they become frustrated. And my personal opinion is if we can do a better job in making these content experts teaching experts and make them better deliverers of instruction, then we will maintain the teachers longer, and the teachers will have a more fulfilling experience, as well as the students. It's the right thing to do for the kids, right thing to do for the teachers. And instructional coaching, if you have this opportunity in your district, which most of you do serve in this function in some type, I think that's the way to pull these teachers and give them some experiences that will help them help themselves. With us today is Cylynn Braswell. She is the Executive Director of College and Career Readiness and Innovation at Northwest ISD. Cylynn is fantastic. She took over for her old buddy, Tony Neely, and boy, she hit the ground running, and it really expanded the programs, and she's expanding the programs, and her CTE program is growing with the area, and that's hard to do, Cylynn. I congratulate you on what you have going there in Northwest. Cylynn today is going to examine the strategies from Jim Knight's instructional playbook alongside the research from How People Learn, the Brain, the Mind, Experience in School in that expanded editions. When you leave this cohort meeting, you should exit the session equipped with strategies and techniques to improve instructional delivery in your CTE programs. So Cylynn, I'm going to relinquish the screen share to you, so just take it over.
No problem. We are ready to go. It's great to see everybody today. I really am excited to be here and very grateful for this. It's nice too because it's not Zoom webinar, so I can actually see some faces, but not a lot out there. Obviously, with so many people on here, just a couple of norms for us as we go. If you have questions, feel free to throw them into the chat. I may not be able to get to them as I'm speaking, but hopefully by the end, Mark, if you'll just kind of moderate me back into if there's anything in the chat that you saw that we need to address that I didn't touch on, make sure that I get into those. And then I talk pretty fast, but I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit for this. There is a lot of content here. There are some places where I won't spend a lot of time, but it's all in the presentation where you can go on. With this, obviously, I've put a few contact things in here, so if you need anything, always feel free to reach out. My phone number is here, email address, and then on that front page is my tiny URL. If you want to see a little bit more about my whole philosophy and what I believe and what I think, you're more than welcome to, and some design thinking. We're a very open district. We believe in sharing and giving as many resources as possible. So welcome. I hope you have an amazing time. And we're going to have a hard stop at 3:15. So because I'll have to jump onto another call. So just want to make sure we're all on the same page. So let's just get started and let's ground our work. One of the things that I like to do with my teams whenever I'm working with them is to actually make them think about those moments. So let's ground our work really quickly. And I want you to look at this and just think of a time when you were trying to coach someone. And I really want you to, what was the complexity of that situation? What challenged you? Where were you thinking about? So let's just take a minute to think about that. As you're thinking through that, what were the feelings, the thoughts, or the reactions? So if somebody wants to throw into the chat some of what they're kind of thinking or seeing. See if I can get the chat feature. For some reason, I'm not seeing it.
Jump in. One of the things, the thoughts that's going through your mind is, does this person really want my help? Are they open to what I want to provide for them?
That's a great question right there. Are they open to what I want to provide for them? And I think a lot of us get challenged there. A lot of us fall into those what if scenarios. And so one of the things that we're going to see today as we go through this process is understanding how to build this relationship where the teacher seeks coaching, because it can't be about you know everything. It's got to be about the teacher wanting to improve. How do we get them to seek coaching? So we're going to go through some of those. And as we go through this, I want to start with this piece right here. And if you're going to see a lot of resources in this presentation, and the reason being is I believe all readers are leaders, and all leaders are readers. And I really think that it's important to know what the research says out there. And we're living in research, and we're going to talk about some practice and see a few things, but understanding what people say. And this was one of the very first books that I ever read on coaching. It's a 2013 book, Elena Aguilar. And I think where she really hits it home is coaching at its essence is the way that the human beings have always learned best. How do we coach each other? My coach style is a little different than how I am sometimes in a management or a directive role. But when I'm coaching, it can be different. So these are some of the pieces that we'll kind of look through. Understand that this curriculum, instruction, and assessment piece, they all work together. And we're focusing solely today in the conversation around instruction, but understanding that the curriculum has to be rooted and the assessment has to be true for instructional coaching to actually move us forward. And so this is our learning map for today as you go through. I like when I'm working with a set of students and in an opportunity, making sure that I give them a opportunity to have this beforehand, and they can either use a digital tool to make notes on the learning map, or they can actually use the learning map in a print version, depending on the students or however they need it. And so all of my learners, I want to make sure that they understand where we're going. So today for us, we're going to add to the working knowledge of CT administrators, and we're going to do that by exploring some concepts about how people learn. We're going to go through the cultural proficiency continuum and talk about a layer that has not been discussed as deeply. And then we're going to look at some impact cycle strategies, which is some of our gym night teaching. And I'm going to make sure that you have some resources and some tools to walk out of here with. You're going to see this a couple of times, but feel free. Like I said, Mark has already loaded this presentation, so you'll be able to go ahead and download this if you want to make notes on this, however you get there. So from an instructional coaching piece, the number one thing, and as I looked at the thought exchange and what we got back, what I got back in the feedback piece, it was really about, how do we approach the teacher? How do we get them to see that they have some places that they can improve? And so from an instructional coaching, at the end of the day, it is to improve the teacher, but the results are about the student. How are we improving the student learning and well-being? Instructional coaching is a partnership. There has to be this give that happens between the coach and the coachee. It can't be, I'm the content knowledge person and I know everything, and so here you are. And so I think sometimes we see that, and it's really important to understand that you are walking side by side the teacher. and they need to feel that. They need to seek you and have that advice. So the good instructional coach understands that the teacher is the professional. They really, and I will tell you, I'll own my own faults. I struggled with this, and I struggled to get there because I was so heavy in the expectation of how I wanted a class delivered. And I had to go through quite a few trainings to really get myself to say, no, the teacher has to make this decision, because the piece in this, and we're going to talk about it later about metacognition, and it's that self-reflection piece. And if the teacher doesn't think they need to improve, if you don't get them to that part of the cycle, then you really aren't coaching them. And you can think about it from an athletic perspective, or if you've ever coached a team or tried to help somebody. When you don't make the free throw constantly, then you go and you learn how to make the free throw. And so what our teachers need to know is when they're not making the free throws, because sometimes you can't see it. So let's get into a little bit of where we're going to be working today. So these are resources that I find valuable. I have, you'll see in the tiny URL I gave at the very first slide, I have a lot of recommended readings, but these are the 4 that I would say we're going to really focus on today, and where we find some of the best strategies that we're seeing out there right now. The impact cycle, we will get a lot of heavy resources in the presentation later. You're going to see the instructional playbook as more of a workbook that you can go through with your teams. And this is all about, I mean, guys, if I were to really do you a training, this is a 3-day training. 45 minutes is a drive-by PD to have a conversation to get you started. But what your organization needs, this is about you custom tailoring what your organization needs and how else you're going to function within it. Then culturally proficient coaching. And I'm a big fan of Randall Lindsay and Raymond Terrell's work. This is one of their newest books that are out. And Dolores Lindsay is part of the writing on that as well. And you will find that there's a whole series there that really helps an administrator when we're talking about cultural proficiency. And we're going to get into that. And then how people learn, understanding, and notice that says people, not students, not children, not adolescents, how people learn. So that's all of us as we go through this. So let's get into the work. And this is what the layered learning will look like. When you look at an instructional coaching model, and I will tell you, so I serve a district that is 234 square miles, 14 communities, 3 counties. I have about 15 direct reports, and 7 of them are curriculum coordinators within CTE. And all of our curriculum coordinators went through a 3-day training on how people learn and understanding the tenets that are there. They also have done all of their pre-reading for our cultural proficiency, and our second layer is actually doing the cultural proficiency coaching, and then the instructional coaching on top of that. So with that being said, that is this is our approach that we are taking to this work and how it works best for us. As a district with instructional coaching, we use a couple of different models, and I'll kind of talk to you a little bit about that. So let's start with our map here. We're going to get into the concepts of how people learn. You're going to see 3 different areas that we're going to be focused in on: preconceptions and misconceptions, the context of learning, and the metacognition or self-reflection. So as we go through, let's start with the first part, preconceptions and misconceptions. When you are building the curriculum, and I think a lot of people get very confused about what a coach is, and I saw that in the thought exchange, people asking, well, am I over curriculum? Am I over administration? When you're instructionally coaching, your role is coaching the instruction, that's it. But there are times where you're wearing the hat that you're creating curriculum. And there are times where you're having to live in compliance. Don't get me wrong, they blend in moments. You'll see them, they're very fast and nuanced. But when you're coaching, be solely focused on coaching. It's hard to delineate roles based on your organization though. And so you have to be very careful. If you are overseeing a direct report and you don't have a good coaching relationship, it does make it hard. So with how people learn in the preconceptions area, what we find is if a student has a preconception, or if anybody comes to the table with a preconception or a misconception, then it skews the context in their head where they connect everything. And so this is something that we're going to see a lot as we go through. You're going to notice this number 1 here in this presentation. You will see different places where that number 1 is anchored, because we are using that as a way to dispel preconceptions or misconceptions based on the exchange that you ran. It's really important when a teacher is coming into a classroom to know what the students' preconceptions of a topic are. So that's a great place for you to start when you're opening a lesson. If you're unpacking or maybe you're chunking information for the week, start with preconceptions and misconceptions around vocabulary, pre-teaching the vocabulary, understanding the context around it. Don't just give definitions and having people write things out. It's really important to do that. So let's look at number 2. And yes, the PowerPoint should be loaded for everyone. So let's look at number 2. So develop the competence in the context. So if a student doesn't have, or a person does not have that factual knowledge, if it's just surface level, it's not deep, they really don't understand the concepts that you're working in, it makes it really hard to move forward in the curriculum or to be able to coach around that. The other thing too is being able to organize knowledge in certain ways so that you can get to it faster. So we started with the learning map. The reason being we put a learning map in front of you is so that you can write those things on that map and be able to build places for retrieval when you need to reach for them. Very important for you to be able to go and actually retrieve that information. And a lot of people have different ways. For me, I'm actually someone who sees visual with numbers. And so when I am taking notes, I use visuals and numbers to take notes because that's how I recall better. And it's a way for me to anchor better. Like I said, I'm going over this quick. This is a 3-day training. These are just the tenets here. And then the last part is self-reflection, that metacognition. You've got to have an approach. Learners need to be able to take control of their own learning. They need to know where they can improve. They need to know how they can get better. So that, from a perspective of your curriculum and working with your coaching, engaging some of those pieces are really important. So to get into instructional coaching, you have to have a foundation that does your curriculum support those 3 things. Does it make sure, no matter what, you address preconceptions and misconceptions? There's a context for the learning where you can recall, and there's a place and an opportunity for metacognition. With that being said, if you are buying, for me, like if I buy a piece of software for e-learning, if it does not address any of those 3 things, nor does it build in a place for those 3 tenets, I usually don't buy it. Very picky about the curriculum that I would put in front of my students. And so this is a place where I want to make sure that that happens. So let's move into the cultural proficiency layer. So we're going to kind of go over the guiding principles of why this is important in CTE. It's much more than just understanding what the federal government says we're supposed to do. So a lot of times we see people who come to us and say, cultural proficiency is, and you can fill in the blank. Cultural proficiency is about race. Cultural proficiency is about, and there are some preconceptions and misconceptions that sit there as well. Cultural proficiency coaching is not about fixing teachers. Same with instructional coaching. I go back to, you see this 1 here, talking about the preconceptions. When I look at some of the thought exchange, when I look at some of the comments that happen in other areas that I work, a lot of times it's about fixing a teacher's thoughts, attitudes, or values. Cultural proficiency teaching is not about that. It's about understanding how to connect the families and the diversity of a community into the classroom. Having a cultural proficiency coaching mindset allows us to improve the practices and celebrate the diversity in the classrooms. If the classroom is not a safe place for all students, then you are going to struggle with instructional coaching because you're going to get caught up in that piece. And I even go so far as to say, if it's not a safe place, how well is the learning happening for the student? And so it's more than just ESSA, right? You know, it's more than federal law. So this is the pre-readings that I would say are a good place to start. Sometimes there's there's a ton of stuff out there, guys. I think there's amazing people to endorse, and I don't endorse just one of anything. But when I work with my team, this is what I started with. I said, we have to understand a lot of different nuances. I start with reaching and teaching students in poverty, number one, because it really does help us focus in on the fact that poverty does not know race. Although there is disproportionality that lives in lots of places, it doesn't hit it hits all subgroups. And I say subgroups because that's what we unfortunately use, which not my favorite term. Special education, it is so important. We see disproportionality constantly in programs. And so having a cultural understanding of students and their abilities and their families and the communities they live in, once again, unless it's a safe place, you can't get to the learning. So, and then, like I said, Randall Lindsay, White Fragility, these are all they're great places to start. I'm not going to read all of these to you. I have put them in the presentation solely for understanding context of learning here. And this is the 9 guiding principles. My favorite one is helping people see this one right here. Families are bicultural because they know their home culture and their school culture. I think it's one of the most powerful statements. There is a difference in how people live and how people go to school. And I think we forget that. And sometimes we put our own values in our classrooms. There's a lot of places to live here. This is a fantastic book. It's a great thing, great tool to put in your toolkit. It's a workbook, so you can work through it very detailed. When we look at the classroom itself, the barriers are important. And guys, there's a difference between a barrier and an obstacle. And I won't go into all my metaphors that live on that. But understanding this resistance to change in the classroom, and whether it's a teacher's resistance to change or a system's resistance to change or campus, I see that a lot. We take care of 4 different high school campuses, 6 different middle school campuses, and within that, and 160 different teachers, and a lot of autonomy that's given across the district. New barriers form, and it's most of the time it's an unintentional consequence. It wasn't something that was intentionally built. It was something built out of a mindset. So this unawareness of a need to adapt, you need to be able to put those self-assessments there. With that, this is actually the cultural proficiency continuum. And I said in our learning map that we kind of take through this, how do you get here? So understanding what cultural destructiveness is, I hear a lot of people who live in cultural blindness and they're refusing to acknowledge the culture of others. It's interesting, one of the things that I'll do in a classroom, the first thing I'll look at is, do you have chairs and tables that are ADA compliant in your labs? When I'm buying furniture, one of the first things I do is make sure that I have looked at my proportionalities in my room and ensure that I have tables and chairs. Do you specifically seek out stools that are uncomfortable for people to sit on that might have some type of disability, like even, or an ability like maybe even scoliosis? Like, are you looking at those things? And then how do we move out of this cultural blindness into pre-competence? This is where you start seeing the spectrum, start building that awareness, understanding diverse settings, seeing facilities, seeing people, ensuring that you get to where you're at in the lifelong commitment. And I won't preach because I could stay on that all day long. These are some breakthrough questions that I think are really powerful. How accessible is your room and your lab? That's one of them. One of the things I hear about people saying is, well, those parents won't engage with us. Well, how do we know about our families? So when you're coaching a teacher, this level of coaching here, once again, is about creating a safe space in the classroom. What opportunities? These are the breakthrough questions. So what you can do with these questions move them into a Google form, make it anonymous, run a thought exchange. You can do any of those, and actually sit down and build a self-reflection tool for your teachers. So before you even start, you know where you're at, and you can start having those conversations. Because what happens is instead of us having a deficit mentality about the students sitting in our classrooms and then using preconceptions about their families and their engagement, you can actually go into understanding what it is that is in the mind of the teacher about these things. These are some questions where you can start really pushing in and doing some more coaching. So with that being said, let's talk about the actual impact cycle. So this third layer, you've got this understanding of how people learn. And then on top of that understanding of how people learn, and you've built that foundation with your teachers, you come in and you build a cultural proficiency and understanding around the community in the classroom. Then we start getting into, now let's look at your instruction and how does that play out? And so I'm going to show you Jim Knight's tools, the impact cycle, and we'll go through some slides, and then I'm going to pause because I've covered a lot really quick, so that we can actually ask some Q&A, and then I can show you where some tools are, because this goes very fast. So there's 3 approaches to coaching: facilitative, directive, and dialogical. And so the facilitative coaching, and I have this ICLE model. ICL is a model that we've used a lot in my district. All of our administrators were ICL trained. It's a great set of rubrics. It really is collaborating with the teacher, but the teacher drives 99% of it. They seek the work. It's very much teacher driven. And then directive coaching is what I would say a lot of our teachers fall into. They are the master, the student is the apprentice, and they are imparting the knowledge from the master to the apprentice. And we see that a lot. And there's a place for that. There is a place for transferring that knowledge that way. However, the deep learning doesn't necessarily happen here. One of the pitfalls of directive coaching, it doesn't always come back from a transportable skill. It might be a single technical skill that they can build off a rote memory, but they really struggle to transfer that skill into another setting. So dialogical coaching is almost the marrying of the two. It's really having that questioning and listening strategies and helping the conversational moves with the teacher, but also at the same time building a set of goals and strategies with the teacher, not quite in a directive mode, but really coaching them to some goals and helping them make those adaptations. When we look at this partnership becomes really, really powerful. So down here, this link right here with resources, this is where you're gonna wanna go. So in this set of resources, these are free online. You don't even have to buy the book. And there is actually almost 2.5 hours of video that you can watch instructional coaching. I recommend finding a thought partner who would watch them with you and say, what did you see? I think that's a really good way to do that. But Jim has all of this stuff on free. I love this book. It's great. It's a workbook. There's tons of stuff in it. But all of the resources that you could want are right here to at least get started. The book's going to take you into deeper, but you can watch a full coaching cycle with 2 different teachers in this link. So watch your students. Here's this lovely rubric. One of the things that Jim's teachings are really powerful about is you go in and you video the classroom. Now, our teachers should feel a little bit better about video after what we're living through, right? We're at a new level. So hopefully you can get to that mode. This is also a place when you're talking about this whole pivot of being in an engaged learner in a remote learning situation, you can do instructional coaching through videoing through Zoom. You could be building some of those things, even watching students and changing how you do those. So there's some places to play with this model, and I think it can be expanded pretty powerfully. But I love this. You use the rubric on watching the students and say, you know, how are they talking to each other? What do you see in the energy? What are you seeing in the conversation? What are you hearing? What are you noticing? And so when you set up a video camera, you don't want to do the video camera to only focus on the teacher. If you can get in the classroom, focus on the whole classroom. You know, ideal setting, you have 2 cameras and you can see a lot of different angles that are happening there. Maybe you've got a partner in the an administrator who wants to walk with you, and you can do a couple of different things. There's a lot of options that you can try. And so the next piece we say is watch yourself. Now, teachers are they don't like to watch themselves. I don't like watching myself. I always need to lose 10 pounds. It is what it is. You know, there's always that thing that hangs us up. We don't want to watch ourselves, and we don't like our voice or whatever. The more you can do this with your teachers, the better they will be. So if they can watch themselves in a video, this is where you can start really having that context around the learning, but it's also the first level of metacognition. I didn't say it was metacognition. It's the first level because the context matters about how they're going to watch. They haven't necessarily thought about how can I get better? That metacognition comes after the watching. They'll see things here. It's the context. So then we say, okay, well, how do I get to that point? Well, we need a pre-observation conversation. So teacher has sought out and says, I need help. I need a way to, these kids just aren't getting XYZ, fill in the blank. Great. Here's a pre-observation conversation. And this is a checklist for you. This is instructional coaching, and this is in the link right here. So you're going to sit down and say, how are we going to work together? What are we going to do? I wish that I had a better screenshot of this one, but you're going to sit down and say, okay, let's talk about the different kinds of data we're going to gather. Let's say, you know, what do you want to get out of this? Because remember, the teacher is seeking you, but you're going to build goals with them. You know, it's that partnership, but we're pushing a little bit too. So it's those 3 different models together. Then the next piece is right here. So this high impact survey, this could be like a focus walkthrough if you wanted to. So this could happen before a pre-conference, and maybe you do this survey and say, this is what I saw. And then the teacher says, okay, let's do a pre-conference based on this. Or you could do a 20-minute high impact survey during your filming and use it there in a more self-reflection. There's a lot of different ways to use these pieces. But what you're looking at is this instruction, the community building, you know, how safe is that classroom? What kind of community is happening there? What did it feel like? And then where did you see that planning and assessment for learning? So peers goals, they're powerful, they're easy, they're emotionally compelling, reachable, and student focused. Now, that word easy cracks me up because everybody's like, oh, so they're easily attainable? No. They're easy, which means they're clear and they're simple and they're easy to understand. We know what we're going for. This is a place where you can coach. So you sit down and you're having that conversation. You've given them a high impact survey. You've gone through and built a checklist. You've had a pre-conference conversation. And now we're saying, let's build a goal here. Let's talk about this. And how is it powerful? What are we trying to do in our classrooms? And is it really student focused? It's not, remember what we said about the coaching in the beginning. Yes, we want the teacher to improve, but it's about student environments they're in. Then let's go through some other, these are listening questions. This is the part that I'm so sad that we aren't in face-to-face and sitting down for an entire day so that I could practice this, because I love to listen and question. Find a partner to do this with. Really listen intently and really seek to have good questioning strategies with your coachees. And then here's how to create a checklist. This is a great resource as well. And there's more information when you go into Impact Cycle. It'll actually show you like the value of creating a checklist. And you can do this for anything. You can do it for student learning. You can do it for any of those pieces. These are just some more, like I said, some examples that were there. Co-teaching planning form. This is another great instructional strategy we don't utilize enough. One of the things that I would say now with what we know about maybe having to have teachers who are possibly remote learners or remote teachers while somebody's possibly in the room face to face, why not build a co-teaching planning model where somebody is remote and somebody is in the classroom and have them working together with a group of students via Zoom and in classrooms? There's lots of ways to do that. And so for us, you know, I'm trying to look at all different nuances that I could have in different kids in different schools even. In my dream world, I would have two teachers that are at two different schools teaching the same class at the same time, but they would be sharing all of their information back and forth with each other. But the co-teaching model allows for you to plan out your time and say, I'm going to do this, you're going to do this. Now, let's evaluate each other. As I'm watching you're doing, what do I? And so there's lots of fun things that you can do there to really help improve the learning with each other. They've got to become a team. Then understanding group techniques, like there's a lot of different ways that we can work within our groups in collaboration now at 6 feet apart. But lots of different things that we could be doing when we're working with our students in a group setting. And so this is a checklist for that. And then this is the learning map piece. So I opened with the learning map. I've shown you 3 different times the learning map just to redirect you back. And it's something you would normally take and write notes on. Here are just for learning map you can do. Just putting together a graphic organizer. You know, some people, you may have been thinking maps trained, and we use that from a brainstorming, norming area. A lot of people use them for notes. The learning map takes us through what are we going after? What are we going to learn? So these are the last parts that just kind of talk about it. And you'll see also here, I need to make sure I point out the Hattie check. Now, there are some people who debunk Hattie's work and they don't believe in Hattie's work. I personally, I like Hattie's work. I'm not too worried about the scale scores as much as I am understanding the nuances of Hattie's work. And how do we work with our teachers on that? And there's enough books out there to last a lifetime on those. So once again, here's a checklist for building that learning map. Does it show those connections through labels? Is it organized? Is it complete? Is it one page? You know, those are really good techniques that you can be coaching with your teachers. When I'm talking about our remote learning situations, we're talking about chunking information and putting a learning map for the week in that front end. So that Monday, here's your learning map and what we're chunking for that week and where we're going to have some benchmarks so that those students can follow right along and it doesn't confuse as much. There's how to create one. Like I said, all these are in here, but you can find so much more here at the Impact Cycle piece. And then here's the learning map, right? So we explored the concepts quickly. We jumped through cultural proficiency, and I showed you where you can take and make that model and do that self-reflection, and then just sharing some of these strategies that we have in the impact cycle. And so through my fastest ever instructional coaching moments, we got there. And I want to show you something. So mind mapping happens a lot. A lot of people like to use it. Some people they confuse it with learning mapping. They're not exactly the same. Mind mapping is more on the receivership side of things. The student who's listening, they're drawing this as they go. This is one that literally, as the agriculturalist in me, it cracks me up. So I threw it in here as part of a thing that I would probably take this, and actually I say it is a 1, 2, 3. I would talk about the preconceptions and misconceptions. So I love having the conversation about methane and meat. And then actually working through from a cultural proficiency lens, is my room safe? So is a student's thought process, and I go back to a culture at home being bicultural. So a culture at home may promote certain environmental thought processes that aren't necessarily shared or supported by a teacher in a classroom. And if the teacher is not culturally inclusive of those students' thoughts, views, or ideas, do they have a safe place? And so the context in which they learn, whether it be the culture at their home or the culture in their classroom, could affect where they're at. And then finally, obviously, the self-reflection piece. So I can come back to this and I can actually be reflective into those things and say, what do I think, believe about this, or what could I have changed? You know, what matters here? So I say all that to say that I went really, really fast. I'm going to throw open the chat, and we have about 8 minutes for questions. Or if you want to just use your mic. Well, I've stunned you quiet.
So, Lynn, I went back to gallery view so we could kind of see who was talking.
That's beautiful. No questions?
I have a quick question. This came up in the chat box as well, so I know that several members were thinking it. What about the difference, like you have an auto tech teacher, a business teacher, anatomy and physiology? Is there a difference in the way you coach people of different content areas?
No. No, the process is still the same because you're focused on the instruction, not the content. If the content is a misrepresentation or the knowledge is the misrepresentation, you address that in the curriculum. The instruction and how you get there, whether it's a modeling, whatever it is, it's the same processes. You still have to go into how people learn. You still have to have a culturally proficient classroom, safe. You still have to have a place that engages learners. It does not matter what they teach. And a lot of people get so caught up in, but I teach this. It's totally opposite. Because good instruction is good instruction no matter what you are teaching. You know, and I've taken a lot of philosophies that I learned in Project Lead the Way that I applied in a floral design classroom. The approaches that I had in my planning, how I laid things out in a lab, what I did there. Those were all processes that lived within, you know, the content changed, but the processes didn't from class to class to get to learning. And
so Lynn, oh, I'm sorry, would you agree or would you comment on, a lot of us in here do different roles within the district. Tell us about how instructional coaching kind of plays a part regardless of your role if you're in a teacher support position.
No matter where it is. You know, I hear a lot of people say, well, that's not my boss. Well, I'm not a T-test appraiser for any of my teachers, but I am there, every one of them, I'm going to help instructionally coach no matter what I'm seeing in the classroom. When I'm in the classroom or when I'm having, you could ask any of my teachers, when they bring an idea, I counter that idea and I ask questions and I probe and I want to know why we're going where we're going. I want to know why we're going. And I try not to be confrontational about it because we're in a partnership. And so what is so important is to build in your organization a level of trust that this isn't about me telling you where you're wrong. This is about me sitting down with you and saying, how is learning happening in your classroom? And then how do you think as teacher, you could help the learning go further? What could that look like? Once again, that teacher has to be viewed as a professional. And that is hard because we got to take that hat off if they've done something that we are frustrated with, or they are not following the curriculum, or they're misinformed in the content, or they're not deep in their craft. That really, when their craft is off, that really leaves us hanging in a couple of different places. Those are segmented, but they all run together. It's hard. It's hard. This is work that requires a lot of study. It is important to read. It is important to put yourself in front of it to say, what can I do to change everything when it comes to learning in the classrooms if it's not happening? How do I move that? What can I do to move that forward? And that's really, really important. A lot of people live in that surface knowledge, and they think assessment is an industry-based certification, and they think that it's okay to say that we took a knowledge test that was a bunch of multiple choice. That is not transference of knowledge. That is not transportable skills. And as soon as you say that that's not an expectation anymore, then you'll see a change.
For sure. And Ms. Herrera in the chat box is asking, you're after the root of instruction. Is this correct for the type of student being taught?
For every student, yes. I'm looking at every student. How do you differentiate? How do you understand